Right, Janet, I think that's fine.
Thank you, Julia. As always, thank you, Julia. Only one or two of you realise what happens behind the scenes, so it's with gratitude, Julia, without a doubt. So, hello to everyone, and it's wonderful to be here. As always, on a Monday, whether it's morning or evening, we share this time of meditation and we share the reflections of one of our members. And today we have the absolute joy of having Father Lawrence, our spiritual leader, who will share in his reflections after our time of meditation. And something that I often say when I'm the welcomer is that wherever possible, keep your video on. And I know it's not always possible because of personal circumstances or internet connection, but that sense of being together visually is important. So let's begin. O God, come to our assistance. O Lord, make haste to help us. Glory be to the Father, to the Son, to the Holy Spirit, as it was in the beginning, is now, and will be forever. Preparation for our meditation. A reading from the Rule, from the prologue. Seeking neighbours in the multitude of people, God calls out again, who is the one who desires life and longs to see good days? If you hear this and answer, I am the one, God directs these words to you. If you will have true and everlasting life, keep your tongue from evil and your lips from deceit. Turn away from evil and do good. Seek after peace and pursue it. When you have done these things, my eyes shall be upon you, and my ears open to your prayers. And even before you call upon me, I will say, here I am. What, dearest ones, can be sweeter to us than this voice of God inviting us? See, in loving kindness, God shows us the way of life. Heavenly Father, open our hearts to the silent presence of the Spirit of your Son. Lead us into that mysterious silence where your love is revealed to all who call. Maranatha, come, Lord Jesus. So here we are together and able to share something very precious. And I was thinking of the bookshelf that I've got, or the bookshelves I've got, how many books I have of Father John Main and Father Lawrence Freeman, and how often I return to those books, perhaps just flicking through and finding precious word, a wisdom for today. And that's our legacy. It's a legacy for WCCM, it's a legacy for the world. But what an extraordinary privilege it is to now hear Lawrence, to hear those words. It's something, it is something beyond measure. So, Father Lawrence, I don't really need to introduce you anymore than to say welcome. And here we are. And the title, The Civilizing Influence of the Rule of St. Benedict, seems to me to be very apt. So, welcome.
Thank you, Janet, very much. I'm glad you didn't make a bigger introduction. That was a big enough hurdle to get over as it is. Thank you. Well, it's lovely to be back with Benedict's Well again. It's a wonderful entity, this gathering every Monday from all over the world, just looking at the range of places and people. So itself, I think, is a sign of what I'd like to talk about today, the civilizing influence of the rule of Saint Benedict. Let's begin with something John Main says. There are two books of John Main that would give great insight into this theme. One is Monastery Without Walls, which is the collection of the letters he wrote, rather like St. Paul wrote to and from the young communities of the early church. John Main wrote them during the 5 years he was in Montreal before he died. And each of those letters 4 times a year capture 24 of these letters, similar to the 24 conferences of John Cassian, are a wonderful fruit of his lived experience and his reflection on that experience of starting a new kind of Benedictine monastery in Montreal from scratch, and yet from scratch as part of a long and rich tradition which he loved and respected and drew on always. And the other book, of course, is Community of Love. Can't see myself here anyway. Can you see it? Community of Love, which is a collection of his thoughts on a number of topics. And this idea of a community of love is central to this idea of a civilizing influence of the rule of Saint Benedict. This is what he says in the Monastic Adventure. The essentially civilizing power of monasticism in the past was not the quiet scribes copying the manuscripts of a threatened culture, nor was it the patronage of the arts by the great monasteries. The essential contribution of monks to their civilization is always that they form a community of love, in which the center not only holds, but continually expands. The vitality of its centeredness passes over into every aspect of its life and makes of its life what W.B. Yeats's phrase could be used to describe the truly Christian civilization, the ceremony of innocence. You remember his line, mere anarchy is loosed, the ceremony of innocence is drowned, mere anarchy is loosed upon the world. The best are full of passionate conviction, and the worst of, I forget the last line. Anyway, this idea of a ceremony of innocence at the heart of a civilization. This is what I'd like to start with, this idea. So the rule for monks, what does that mean today, 1500 years after Benedict's death? It means a rule of life, not rules for life, but a rule for life. I don't have it on my desk at the moment, but you know what a ruler is. This thing that allows you to do a straight line. A rule for life, which means for people who are serious about God. He says the only criterion of admission to the community is, do they truly seek God? And that can only be ascertained if you live with them and they live with you over a period of time. He allows 1 year, actually, but 1 year of probably quite intense coexistence. And then you will have a good sense of whether they are truly seeking God or whether they're just escaping from the world, escaping from themselves, escaping from taxes, or escaping from, bad marriages or whatever. Are they truly seeking God? And what is it that makes somebody truly serious about seeking God? I think it's not a matter of choice. In my own experience, it is not. I had little or no choice, in a sense. I could give my assent to what I sensed was I was being drawn to, called to. But it's not a question of a lifestyle choice. It's for people who are being touched and who have heard the call of God, who we might call also the ever-present origin, as it is described in the prologue, in those verses that Janet read before the meditation. So the image here is of the call of God coming down into the crowd and looking for the laborer, the person who really wants to work. And then the question in this is, do you want life? Do you want to be really alive? And if you say yes, you want to be open to the divinizing power of the light of God, then you're the one, you can follow. That's the idea, that this call penetrates through the crowd, through the mass, through the social media, through the plethora of images, through the anxieties and self-preoccupations that we all have. It penetrates right through that like a bolt of lightning, and it comes into you or comes up from within you, and it asks you this question, or it leaves you with this experience of a question, and then how do you respond to that with your life? That's, I think, what we mean by truly seeking God. And there has to be this assent, and he gives time patiently for that process to be worked out and discerned by the individual and by the community. So this is an intensely personal call. Actually, it's unavoidable. Everybody's going to get it. You may get it in the last few seconds of your life, after a life where you have been caught up in the crowd of your thoughts, the crowd of your lifestyle. But eventually, sometime this call will penetrate, and it is a redemptive call as well. And it will, at some point, break through our ego defenses, maybe at the last moment before death. But when it is heard and when it is obeyed earlier in life, it changes everything for us. It changes the way we live. It allows us to live in a more full, free, alive, vital, God-centered, loving way. But you might think, oh, this is all about self-fulfillment. Well, it is and it isn't. It is not individualistic, like many of the other calls that we are receiving today to buy this or do that or vote this way or vote that way. It's not individualistic, it is personalizing. It turns us from being individuals locked into our isolation and therefore into our sadness. It breaks through that and it opens up the experience of being a person. And what is a person? A person is somebody who knows that they are in relationship, that they are not isolated, autonomous beings out to survive or out to protect themselves, but they are persons in a relationship, in a relational existence much bigger than we can imagine. Because it calls us out of the crowd. This is the big difference, the civilizing influence of the rule, because it is about leaving the crowd and entering into a community of persons. And there, in the crowd is characterized by the ego. The crowd, protest movements, where sometimes football crowds, any large gathering of people which takes over from personal identity, personal integrity. And I'm not saying you can't go to a football match or go to a concert, but a crowd is different. A crowd is something that smothers and sucks the life out of the person and just leaves them as a member of the crowd. And that crowd is fickle by nature. It can be used, manipulated, and today through social media and algorithms, we are creating these crowds in a most obscene way and polarizing way. But this calls us out of the ego crowd, which the ego is always longing to be different. In fact, it's like every other ego. One ego is like any other ego. It's only persons who are unique. And some egos are bigger than others, that's the only difference. But persons are intrinsically unique. And therefore you can hardly legislate for persons. But of course we have to. But persons living together, people who know that they are in relationship and are growing in the sense of the ultimate relationship with the ground of and source of our existence, the ever-present origin. That is what the rule of Saint Benedict is about. How do you legislate, if you like, or how do you compose a rule of life for these more mature individuals who are becoming persons? Because we all need discipline and authority. And so we come out of the crowd into the challenging experience of community. And why is it challenging? Because after you've begun to live with people, then you know that you are known. And we are continually having our self-deception confronted. When the ego arises, and it does, of course, the ego doesn't just disappear when you go into community. The ego is actually exposed more. So you see the ego of the people you're living with, and your own ego, please, I hope, even more than before. But what is different is that in community, you are accepting that your self-deception is being confronted. So this is a kind of a dual identity, the solitude of the true self, unique and whole, and the constant struggle of community to achieve non-duality. And how does a simple community try to achieve non-duality? Not by reading books on non-duality, but through a spirit of service and other-centeredness in very concrete, simple ways, day by day. The school of the Lord's service, St. Benedict says, that is the way, the other-centeredness that John Mayen speaks about as the discipline and the fruit of meditation. And because of this, the rule embodies Benedict's real vision, practical vision, dealing with food and drink and clothing and guests and conflicts and nuts and bolts and the utensils of the monastery. The actual practicalities of life, embodying Benedict's vision of a life that is lived towards God, not ourselves. Big difference. We can see why it has had and could have a civilizing influence in any society where this is taken seriously and lived faithfully. But we have to make a big distinction between the monasticism that Benedict experienced and expressed in the rule and the monasticism that we are more familiar with since the Middle Ages. The more institutionalized monasticism, subject to more clericalized. Benedict, of course, was not a priest, never forget that. The early communities were hierarchical. Every human institution is hierarchical in some way, but it was not clerical. Again, big difference. He celebrated Eucharist once a week in the community. Now most monastic congregations have a rule that you have to celebrate Mass every day. And most of the monks, or many of the monks, the majority of the monks probably, became priests if they could read Latin. So there's a big difference between this, what we might call the Benedictine monasticism, and then the medieval monasticism, once it had become absorbed into the great offices and institutions of state, great landowners, and abbots often didn't even live in their monasteries because they were men of power living, in the court or elsewhere. So we have to be very clear about what kind of monasticism we're talking about. And I think the kind of monasticism that we could need today to civilize our declining civilization has to be this, what we might call more primitive or early, pure form of monasticism. That's going to be difficult because it's not about going back to some imaginary thing like the Benedict option, some kind of cozy golden romantic period, golden age. But it's about rediscovering the universal archetype of the monastery and of the monk. The rule is very honest about and very realistic about the challenges and difficulties of a life path such as this, truly seeking God. It is realistic and it integrates three essential elements of civilized behavior anywhere, in any group of human beings. If they're going to live in a civilized way, then they have to follow these principles, and they are also the essential elements of a contemplative life, what we mean by contemplative living. This is why we can say that the basis of a civilization is contemplation. Where we have been alienated from contemplation, we don't know what contemplation means anymore, then civilization itself begins to unravel. It loses its connection to ultimate reality. And these three elements, I would say, are obedience. And that means, of course, at one level, accepting authority, freely accepting authority. But it means, at a deeper level, listening to others in a way that gives them dignity and respect, even if they are maybe very low on the social ladder, or not very bright, or not very, apparently significant members of the group. But we listen to them as if they were Aristotle or Plato. So we have to learn this obedience. I was given a book the other day called, I think, the Promise That Will Change the World. And the subtitle is, I Promise Not to Interrupt. And we all know how easy it is to break that promise. And in community, when everything's well and everyone's in a good mood, everybody listens. But as soon as you talk about something serious or somebody's in a bad mood, then we interrupt. But listening is giving great dignity to the other person. The second element, of course, is work. Monasteries were places of work. Idleness is the enemy of the soul, says St. Benedict. So we should be working at certain times, but not 24 hours a day. We need time for other important activities, including rest. But good work is the critical thing. And work, if you know my book on the subject, good work is work that brings out the best in us and produces benefits for other people, tangible benefits for other people. So in Benedict's vision, this is not about money. That's very secondary. The monasteries that he formed and the early monasteries operated on quite a positive economic principle. They were able to give bread to the poor and look after the poor during times of famine or sickness, because they were not capitalist-driven, profit-motivated institutions. So, but above all, for Benedict, work is service, other-centered work. And it keeps us incarnate. It keeps us grounded, not angelic, not in some pious head trip about spirituality. And the third, and of course, the unifying element of the life is prayer. Authentic prayer, not just tribal prayer, where we all march off to times of worship together and feel, and which could easily become a crowd, especially in much church architecture today, you feel you're an audience or a crowd. So the declining numbers of people who go to church gives us an opportunity to recover the essence of authentic prayer, which is not just tribal or just about personal consolation, but pure prayer. the prayer of the heart, the prayer actually that Jesus taught in the Sermon on the Mount, and the prayer that finds its simplest expression in the teaching of meditation that John Main passed on. This rule of life might sound very, very highfalutin or very aspirational, but it's actually it's for beginners. He says at the end of the rule, this is a little rule for beginners. It's elementary, my dear Watson. It's just for beginners. It should therefore be flexible and forgiving, but it does expect and demand that people grow. And that's why these communities that Benedict formed and that formed during the Dark Ages when civilization was collapsing around it, these monasteries, communities became islands of civility and order and peace, and therefore of culture, because you need peace and civility and leisure to have culture. And that's why these monasteries became civilized and civilizing places in the midst of collapse and conflict. And as I say, they were non-clerical. The future of Christianity will have to be a huge reduction in its clerical obsessiveness. And they were communitarian, not despotic. The abbot can be voted out, or if he goes crazy, he's kicked out. But if he's doing his best and he's been elected, then he must be given respect and authority. It is hierarchical. People don't like hierarchy, but even people who say they don't like hierarchy usually create secret hierarchies that they don't actually admit. And this is the alternative to the crowd. And that's why there's a hunger for this kind of life in our world today, because our world today has been dominated by the crowd, by the existence of consumerism and populism. Now, what's the problem here? The problem here is training and formation. It is not easy to live this life. And that's why Benedict wrote this rule with this beautiful, wise, subtle, mature balances of checks and balances with such wisdom, because it's people come in uncivilized, and I've seen this throughout my life. I mean, I was very uncivilized when I went into monastic life. I had a good education, but I was very much an individual. And my year of novitiate, which was a very traditional 2 years, actually, of monastic training and formation, I knew it was doing me good, but it was not easy. It hurt me. And I occasionally flew into, I felt very angry about what was happening, but I knew it was my ego being tamed. And I could have walked out at any time, but I knew that it was doing me good, and I trusted. Unfortunately, I had the best novice master you could find. So this is the problem for life today. How do we build these kind of communities and give the kind of formation and training necessary? I'm thinking deeply about this because it isn't an easy solution. And I think I would like one day that Bonneau would be a place where we could offer the Benedictine Oblate year as an experience for people in this kind of formation. And it has to be different from what it was like for me, or to some degree, and what it was like in the past. But somehow we have to recover an understanding of this kind of personal, psychological, social formation in a contemplative way. so that we will be ready, as St. Benedict says, for the single-handed combat of the desert later. But we're not capable of enduring solitude when we begin, because we're too damned egotistical. And so we just run back into the crowd. To handle solitude, we have to learn to meditate. So meditation, like meditation, the rule itself is a middle way. It's a narrow path, as Jesus calls it, between the crowd, the anonymity of populism or consumerism, and atomized individuality, which leads to so much mental illness, loneliness, and increasing rates of suicide in the affluent world. The rule recognizes the necessary danger of losing your first fervor of conversion. You'll go into all of this with great enthusiasm, but the enthusiasm wears off as you get into the work. And there is also, therefore, a danger as you lose your first fervor of conversion that you become complacent, that you learn the tricks, you learn how to perform externally, but you become self-protecting, and your conversion of heart slows down, perhaps even to zero. This is the challenge. And that's why we cannot judge a community, monastic community, or indeed any kind of contemplative community, just by appearances. Such communities seeking God truly are urgently needed today, but very hard to build. But the attempt is worthwhile, and where one may fail, another may learn from it and do better. The need for monks and the need for contemplatives in the world today is urgent. And this is why I think the oblate path is of such importance. So oblates don't live physically in community in this intense single-minded way that you do if you actually enter into a small group of people following a common life. But the relationship between the contemplative oblate living outside that on a daily basis, but part of it through its contemplative practice and its spirit of service to the world, this, I think, is a very dynamic relationship that can help these kind of communities to survive. So communities may be physical or they may be virtual, but they need constant renewal and refreshment. They need new members. They need change of leadership. They need to adapt to changing circumstances, including financial realities. And above all, they need a real hospitality of a mystical order to welcome the stranger, the guest, as that person is welcomed as Christ. So those are some of the elements that keep a community growing alive. And the relationship between the physical community, which people may live in for a few years, the idea of making a commitment for life is not very strong today, but it happens. People do commit themselves for life, but not just by signing a piece of paper. But the relationship between, as it were, the physical intense communities and the extended communities of oblates, that to me is somewhere there in that there is the secret of recovering Benedict's original vision and creating little communities that will civilize or become places of civilization. They may not civilize the world, but they will give people a taste of what civilized life is. John Main said that the witness to the world that monastic prayer makes is of supreme importance. And he was thinking of monastic prayer. After all, that is what meditating oblate is doing, monastic prayer. And it needs, in his vision, people of deep prayer, people for whom the times of meditation each day in your daily life, as you go to work and as you go shopping and as you deal with grandchildren and great-grandchildren, as you go about your daily life, these times of meditation are non-negotiable. And that is the challenge. So I'm getting a message that my loving timekeeper says I'm talking too much. So I'll leave it at that. But I just refer you to those two books again for you to refresh your own insights into what we mean by monasticism as a civilizing, necessary civilizing force in society, a community of love, and monastery without walls. And just to remind you again, let's not turn Benedict into to something that he would not want to be. Benedict was, remember, it's important to read his life to understand why he became who he became. And that before Benedict, there was a very long, rich tradition of monasticism which he inherited and which he actually embodied more than the Hollywood type of medieval monasticism that we think of today. So it's a new kind of monasticism, but it's not it's not nostalgic and restorationist and Gothic and medieval. It's a very difficult thing for us to do this, but we have to trust the Holy Spirit that we will be able to do it. And here in Bombo, as you know, the monastery that became Bombo was founded in 1119. But there were monks here long before that. We now are pretty certain that there were traces of monastic life here from the 5th century, from the pre-Benedictine monastery of Ligugé, which is the oldest monastery in Europe. They would come here for solitude in the valley of Bombo. So we're talking about 1600 years of contemplative life, energy. And if we see our own challenges in the light of that historical perspective, I think we may be humbled, and that being humble about it would mean that we are maybe more able to take a risk and try to build the kind of community of love that Father John imagined. Thank you. I hope I have gone over my time too much. If I can, I will refund your registration fee eventually. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you, Lawrence. And my apologies for being your loving timekeeper. I just remind everybody that they can listen again on the YouTube channel, the Benedict's YouTube channel, and there is so much in what Father Lawrence has offered us. And that sense of being called out of the crowd, where the ego inhabits, that's a phrase that I will ponder on for a very long time, where crowds smother, polarize, create the us and them, and recognizing that we are indeed a community of love, that both Father Lawrence and John Main have created for us to inhabit. So let us just end with our closing prayer. May the divine assistance be always with us and with our absent brothers and sisters. Thank you again, Lawrence. And I'll hand you over to Julia, who will give you a little bit of info for next.
Thank you, Janet. That wasn't meant to be a rebuke. It was somebody's got to do it, and you do it very nicely. Thank you.
Well, it just remains now for me to add my thanks to Father Lawrence. It's always a joy to have you with us. And today was quite wonderful. An awful lot in that for us to think about and reflect on. But as Janet said, we can catch up again on YouTube because there was an awful lot in that talk. So thank you very much indeed. And it's my task now to tell you about next week, and I think it's rather appropriate actually because we have Janet with us, Janet Robbins, who's been your welcomer today. And Janet has been part of WCCM community for many years, and as an oblate she has offered service in a number of ways, but she currently looks after all those in oblate formation in the UK. She continues to work as a counsellor in industry, but is definitely retiring later this year. However, she's been saying that for the last 17 years, so don't hold your breath. The title of her reflection is there a rebellious meditator in all of us? I think that's a very good title, and we look forward to hearing what Janet has to say to us next week. In the meantime, have a very good week, everyone. We look forward to seeing you again. Lots of love and God bless.
Thank you, Julia. Bye all.